to another episode of the More Than a Game podcast, the last one for the year. And a big thank you to those who have supported the podcast throughout the course of the year, and a special thank you to all the guests that we've had on the podcast as well. And today I'm joined by another special guest, another one of my favourite players growing up, a man who's had a great career in the NBL. He was the NBL MVP in his breakout year, his first year, 1990, and also the scoring champion for that year as well. He holds the league record for the most assists in a game. He had stints with the Brisbane Bullets, the Townsville Suns, and the West Sydney Razorbacks, as well as stints in playing professionally in the Philippines and in England. And I'm speaking of none other than Derek Rucker. Derek, welcome to the More Than a Game podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan. I'm looking forward to having a nice little conversation with you.
Absolutely, mate. It's a pleasure. And I'll start with the question I always ask my guests, and that is your genesis story or your beginning. And how did you get into the sport of basketball? How did you come to play the game? And can you share a little bit about how you came to play the sport of basketball?
Well, I come from a sporting background. My dad was a professional athlete. He played in the NFL for many years, and I guess he was probably about halfway through his career when I kind of took a liking to football. Mm-hmm. And I think he accurately predicted that I probably wasn't going to have the body shape or size to be able to play in the National Football League. So I think at the age of 6, he got me into basketball, and I just had a natural affinity for it. I really liked it, and I think the family saw that I like to work on my game. And it kind of went from there, man. I just started playing at a pretty early age, and I just always loved it.
That's awesome, mate. I'm interested to know what the difference is growing up in the States, where you're born in Washington, I believe, as opposed to Australia. I mean, I grew up in Sydney and loved the sport here and played grassroots basketball here, but very different to the States, I imagine, because as opposed to the States, I was actually paid out for playing basketball by my mates growing up in a rugby league town, I guess, and it wasn't sort of what you did. It was more rugby league, soccer, or whatever. So I guess I was keen to know some of the differences between, I guess, growing up where basketball's so big in the States and from your point of view, obviously a coach now as well and coaching young athletes, the difference between the grassroots in Australia as opposed to the States.
There's just more opportunity to play the game, I think, in the United States, whether you go to a park I just think there's more access to courts over there, more leagues set up, more youth leagues set up. And I think that's just a function of time. Australia will get there. And I think also in America, everyone's accepting of the fact that players play a lot of different sports. You know, I played everything when I was coming up. I played baseball, I played football, I played basketball. But basketball was the one that I had a real focus and passion for. I really would have loved to have been able to play gridiron. You know, I grew up in football locker rooms, and, you know, it was kind of the family business. But I think over time, Australia will get like that. But it is really hard. I'm sure, as you know, down in Sydney and Melbourne encounters the same problems. Like after school, it's very hard for kids to get access to a quality basketball court. You know, and it's not like in America where people are hooping outside on courts, you know, on a regular basis. So, you know, in time it will get there. But I think that's probably the primary the difference between the two countries in basketball.
That's interesting. And I think part of that is obviously kids want to strive to play NBA, but also college basketball. The college system's huge in the States. And you had the opportunity to play that for Davidson College, I believe, and had a few years there, but from there you stepped into professional basketball, and obviously your first stint out here with the Brisbane Bullets. I'm interested to know, like back then, obviously the league wasn't as well known as it is today in the States. So how did that opportunity come about, and what were the circumstances that led to you finishing up with college and then making the move down under?
Out of college, I was an undrafted free agent, so I got picked up by the Cavaliers, and I went to summer camp with Cleveland. Did really well, you know, had nice reviews coming out of my summer camp performance. I got a job down in Central America. And at that time, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was very hard for small guards to get opportunities. The game was played differently than it is now. And I had limited opportunities. I went down to El Salvador. That was my first professional job. I did well there. I was MVP and scoring champ. My team won the championship. And then out of nowhere, I got a call from an agent and a former coach, Dave Atkins, and he said that the Bullets were looking for a point guard, and that head coach Brian Curl was coming over with the team. They were touring the United States, I think, around Thanksgiving of 1989.
Yeah.
And I'd have to trial and play well on that tour to make the team. And, as fate would have it, I did a good job on that tour. They liked me, and I was picked up, and I flew over, I think, in February of 1990 to Brisbane, and kind of went from there. I had a good first season, and, it was the beginning of a very fruitful and prosperous career for me here.
Yeah, you obviously enjoyed the lifestyle down here and the opportunity you had, no doubt.
Yeah, probably enjoyed the lifestyle a little bit too much at times, but it was a great time to be a pro athlete in Australia. It was before cell phones and everybody in your business. It was definitely a different era, and I'm very pleased that I lived through it then instead of trying to deal with what the athletes of today have to deal with.
Absolutely. Can you talk a bit about being an import and coming into the country? Like, obviously now it's sort of like a destination before the NBA for players, and it's where imports come to play in the NBL. But I guess back then it wasn't, as I said, as big overseas. So was there a huge culture shock or transition? Can you give us a bit of insight into what it was like for imports coming in from the States back then in those early years?
There was a lot of pressure. You had to perform. You had to put numbers up. It was very rare for an import to come in to a situation where they were like playing a role, where you could get 10 points and still retain your job. I'd probably say if you had 10 points in back-to-back games, if you were not cut, you were going to get cut the third game if you produced those types of numbers. I think it was a lot more cutthroat. And, there were only 2 imports, but everybody pretty much had really good imports. In terms of its relationship to the NBA, the people in the industry, those that were really good in America and the NBA, were aware of the strength of the Australian League even back then. And from, there were guys that got short-term contracts out of it. Ricky Grace went back and played in the NBA. Doug Overton made a nice career out of it from his stint over here. I went back and continued to try and compete for NBA spots in the summer. So, this isn't necessarily a new thing in terms of the NBA being aware of the strength of the Australian League. I think it's just probably a bit more publicized now. And now these guys see it at a younger age. You can come over out of high school. You can come over as a 20-year-old as opposed to, a 23 or a 25-year-old, play well, improve your merit, and show that you have what it takes to play in the NBA.
Absolutely. And obviously you hit the ground running, as I said, and NBL MVP, scoring champion. Obviously made your mark. And I'll go off track here a little bit with my questions because it got me thinking. I was researching your career for the podcast today. You've seen guys like Ricky Grace and also Darryl McDonald. They suited up for the Boomers at one occasion. I was just interested to know, was there ever a chance, like you've been in the country for so long, did you ever think of making that step or trying to be naturalized to play for the Boomers? I reckon it would.
So I was naturalized in 1999. I was naturalized and I got my Australian citizenship. So I was a part of the Boomers preparation. I was in the camp in the lead up to Sydney 2000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think I went to 2 or 3 camps. Obviously, I didn't make the team. Ricky Grace took that naturalized spot.
Right.
The final camp I went to, it was great. It was tremendous getting to play with those guys, obviously with Andrew Gaze, Shane Hill, Mark Bradkey, Vlahoff, Ricky, Sam McKinnon. There's Tony Ronaldson. It was a very strong team, and one of the great things was I was a shadow team member, so we had early access to a lot of the Olympic ticketing. So I was able to get a lot of tickets to great events, and my dad came over, and we had a really great time. And obviously the Boomers did well at that Olympic Games, finishing 4th. So I've been through the system. I know what the guys go through. I wasn't deeply entrenched in it, but I got enough of a taste of it, and I was close enough friends and colleagues with a lot of those guys of that era to know what that meant to them and what Boomers culture was all about. The head coach at that time was the great Barry Barnes. So, it was tough, but it's something that's very important to anybody that that's gone through that type of process.
Absolutely. So did you suit up at all for the Boomers? Or?
No, I didn't. I only got to camp. I went to the camps, and when you get cut, it's never a good feeling. I was pretty disappointed, but truth be told, I probably wasn't deserving of the spot anyway. So that's just the way it is. And the guys who went represent the country well, and I was proud of them. Despite me not making the team.
That's awesome. And so obviously you looked on with joy, seeing them win the bronze medal just recently at the 2020 Olympics. I had Shane Hill on the podcast, and he was just overjoyed being part of that program for so long, and hearing you talk about being part of it. So, what was that like when you saw those scenes of them getting the medal around their necks? And I'm guessing it was encouraging.
There was so much. For me, I was just nervous going into it. But then I think midway through the second quarter, I think Patty Mills' body language and his whole attitude during that game, you could see he had the mentality like, I'm going to get us there. And if I don't get us there, it will all be on my back. And I like that mentality. I like players that are unafraid to fail and to really go after it. And Patty put on one of the legendary all-time Olympic performances. I don't care if it was a bronze medal game. Like, that was a tremendous game, and it has to go down as one of the top 10 Olympic performances in basketball of all time. And he got what we had all waited for so long. He got the bronze medal, and that whole team is forever etched in a historic place in Australian basketball history.
Absolutely. And to go to the next level, obviously, I believe we've got the players to do it. It's only a few years away now. So, but you look at Josh Giddey's performances in the NBA, they've been phenomenal. Hopefully Ben Simmons is a part of that. Do you think they can take that next step and get that gold medal?
I don't think so. Look, if the American team sends their top team over, and keep in mind, that was not America's best team they sent over.
True.
There was no Curry. If Steph Curry goes over, it changes that thing entirely. Look, a lot of guys were left behind, and that's no disrespect to the other countries, but I just have to be realistic about it. Durant was probably the really only true great that went. There were a lot of guys left behind, and I think it's going to always be tough over the course of 2 weeks to knock off an American team. And, while it can happen, it's very, very, very unlikely.
See how we go. Maybe an element of luck, but let's dive back into your career. And we talked about Shane Hill, and you obviously shared the screen with him on the basketball show, and saw an episode last night. And as I've been watching that, I might be reading into a little bit more, but I see a healthy rivalry between you two, even when you're debating and talking about that. Yeah, I was going to say, was he one of your rivals when you're playing? And if not,
of course. Well, I've known Shane for 31 years.
Wow.
And I can't even remember how many times we've played against each other. I can't remember how many nights we've had out with each other. I can't remember how many basketball disagreements we've had. And that's healthy. Like, that's the only way that you can learn is by embracing someone else's perspective, not being defensive about it. I don't agree with all of his basketball philosophies. He doesn't agree with all of mine. But, when you strip it all back, it's about one thing, trying to be your best every day. And now we're in a position where we're trying to help others be their best every day. It's not about us. We're trying to get better as coaches. We're trying to be better as media people. We're trying to be objective, trying to evaluate the game properly, so that, this process, this media thing is about education. It's about enlightening, and it's about entertaining. You've got to have an element of all three. And I think Shane has always done a good job of that throughout his career. Now he takes on another task with coaching the Sydney Flames. And, it's going to be very interesting to see how he goes there. I'm sure he's very excited for it, obviously. He gets a chance to coach his daughter. So I'm keen to see how he goes, but I think he'll have his team revved up and ready to go.
Absolutely. And Obviously, it's going to be exciting to see the WNBL season and NBL season starting. We'll come to that in a moment because I want to touch on the NBL with you. But just going back to what you spoke about in terms of differing opinions, you got me thinking about the importance, because this podcast is about leadership as well, and we dive into some of life virtues. And being a coach yourself, I find from a leadership point of view and the opportunities I've had to lead in different settings, you need to embrace different opinions. I think some people that are so focused on their philosophies or their way of life, they miss out on potential other opportunities that may be on the horizon. So I guess from a coaching point of view, that's why you have assistant coaches, because you're bringing in different philosophies. So from a coaching point of view or a player point of view, how important is it, and a leadership point of view, to be open to different perspectives and take them on board, particularly if you want to succeed in anything?
Well, and look, everyone's background is different, but you know, my playing background was a person who made a lot of the on-court decisions. I had the ball in my hands a lot. So, you know, I had a high input into how well the team did or how poorly the team did. And, you know, that drives a lot of, you know, egocentric thinking. And I think one of the big changes I made as a coach, I remember the day I prepared my team. This is about 5 or 6 years ago. I prepared my team to play a certain strategy against a pick and roll. And we were getting blasted in the first half on that pick and roll. And my ego was like, stay with it, Derek, stay with it. And I remember being in the halftime and change room, and I was like, you know what? It's not working. Come up with something else. You got to swallow it and admit to yourself right here that what you had planned for during the week isn't working. Come up with another plan. And we did that. We got back in the game and we won the game. And I think that was a big lesson to me, to suppress ego for the betterment of what's, you know, for the betterment of the team, or in what I do now, what's best for the individual player. So, you know, I think it's a healthy lesson. Coaches that get around with a lot of ego and continually want to think that it's about them, you know, they'll probably produce uneven results, or eventually will find the going really tough. And that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned to date post playing career.
Oh, that's awesome, mate. Take a lot out of that. And also from a leadership point of view, because obviously in your time playing, you did come across like a leader on court. Obviously the point guard, it's part of the position in many ways. And I was part of a conference recently and learned a lot from this leader in the States called Craig Rochelle. You may not have heard of him. He's a non-for-profit leader. He's a pastor. But he speaks a lot about leadership. And one of the things that he spoke about at this conference I was listening to, I'll just quote him, and it dives into the more challenging and harder times in life, which we all go through. Obviously, we speak about the championships or the scoring champions, the NBL MVPs that you're a part of. But obviously, everyone goes through hardships, particularly in your career in general, but particularly now with COVID. But he says, a good leader plans for unforeseen challenges. A great leader plans for unexpected opportunities. And he goes on to say, don't just plan for unforeseen challenges, create margin for opportunities that you can't predict. And I love that because it speaks about persevering through the pain and embracing the pain and hardships in life, knowing there's going to be growth, knowing there's going to be opportunities. So translating that into a sporting environment, whether that's an individual or a team environment, no doubt teams go through challenges. Obviously, they're setting the target of a championship, but it doesn't always go to plan. So as a coach, as a player, has there been times in your life where you've gone through the challenges but persevered and seen growth at the end of, you know, going through the pain? Or is that something that resonates with you as well from a sporting background?
Dan, I have some regrets in terms of how I handled adversity during my career. And look, you know, 15, 20 years ago, we just weren't as well educated on how to deal with so many different issues in our life. And, you know, I was really, really, really hard on myself when we would lose games. You know, I'd lock myself away and go in a shell and just be angry at myself. Not necessarily so much at teammates, because I was really, you know, I become really introspective when things don't go well. But I wish I would have been more well versed in how to handle adversity,
Mm.
because I think my inability to handle it, or not that I didn't handle it well, I just probably didn't handle it properly. There was a better way to do it, which maybe could have raised my floor from day to day. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is those dips down. That's what we're talking about, whether it's a dip in emotions or a dip in performance. And, I think I had so many emotional dips as a result of the game. That's all it caused it. Yeah. My life was so focused on wins and losses. And, that's just the way it is. But
it's natural. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wish that I would have had better strategies to deal with losses, instead of just locking myself in my house and beating myself up for 12 to 15 hours until I actually had to leave the house again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think athletes, and I'm not saying people don't still handle it that way, but I would hope that one would understand that that's probably not the best way to go about it. It doesn't mean you have to be carefree and accepting of losses and so forth, but there's a way to process that without becoming so insular and self-defeating. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That's great. And I've had Cal Bruton on the podcast. I've had Tracy Williams. They all work for Charity Bounce, and it's something they're trying to instill in young players and athletes, that resilience and overcoming adversity. So that's really good. But I know for playing at the level you did, part of the adversity sometimes is overcoming injuries. I remember you had a massive injury when you were playing for the West Sydney Razorbacks, and particularly after you made the grand final that year. But as a big Razorbacks fan, it'd be amiss of me not to go into that career. And for me, looking back on your career, I imagine being part of that organisation, the team you had, John Riley, Simon Dwight, some of these names that were part of that team yourself. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but I can imagine that you look back on those times fondly, playing for all those seasons with the West Sydney Razorbacks.
I loved it. And I think, being the first player ever signed to the franchise was something that I was, very honored by. And I thought we established something pretty quickly. Myself, JR, Dwighty, I thought that was a good little nucleus. Bruce Bolden, that was a nice nucleus for us to build from. And, then we added McKinnon. We started adding a few pieces here and there.
Willie Farley.
Phil Handy before Willie Farley.
That's right. Yeah.
Phil was a part of the team that went to the grand final, and we lost to Willie Farley in Adelaide. But, we got taken down ultimately by the Canterbury Bulldogs salary cap scandal.
Yeah.
Had that scandal not occurred, I probably would have never left West Sydney. But at that point, it put it brought our finances under greater scrutiny.
Wow.
So, and then that was kind of, I think the year after I left and came to Brisbane, they still made the grand final against Sydney.
Yeah.
But things had started to unravel, and it was never quite the same again. But, I loved the time at West Sydney. There were great people. It was good that we got to partner with Canterbury Bankstown Football Club, because I was able to meet some great people there. Again, I love football, so I loved the NRL. And it was great to be around those guys. They had some great players back then, Stephen Price, Hazem Al-Masri, Ricky Stewart, Bradley Clyde, a young Jonathan Thurston, a young Sonny Bill, just big time Willie Mason, big time athletes. And we were training with those guys in the weight room on the regular. So it was a really good feeling. And I love living in Sydney. Sydney is one of the, I really enjoy Brisbane now, but Sydney is truly one of the most beautiful cities of the world. And it was a great time to be there right before the Olympics. It was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah, it was a great time. The Olympics. I keep saying on the podcast, that was a time I made it my life ambition to play professionally. Didn't quite get there, but that was a great time in Sydney at that time. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I got to ask you what your thoughts were as to why it did unravel, because it was such a great organisation. And, as a Razorbacks fan, I jumped ship from the Kings to the Razorbacks, and then, I was disappointed to see how it all ended. But do you think there's room for the next NBL expansion team to, maybe investigate whether the Western Sydney market's a market to go back into. There's great support for the Razorbacks. Do you think the next team or the next step for the NBL is to maybe look at re-establishing that rivalry in Sydney?
Possibly, or maybe, maybe the Hunter region. I'm just not in touch with the basketball down there enough, but I would think somewhere in New South Wales there should be a space for another NBL team. Maybe the Hunter region. I mean, it's, it seems to be a growing area. They have a great basketball legacy down there. Yeah. There's love for the sport. I mean, I'd kind of have to weigh that up. What's more viable, like a Western Sydney or a Hunter region team? Yeah, sure. It's a tough one, And with the Kings, or do you just give Sydney to the Kings? And let's go Sydney, Wollongong, or Canberra. Certainly Canberra must be coming, be getting close to having their own NBL team. So, I mean, I think there are some good alternatives. But I think there is space in one of those three regions for another NBL team. And the league's doing a good job. They're not Larry Kesselman isn't trying to expand too quickly. I think he's on a nice measured approach in terms of expansion. And bringing Tasmania in this year has been really good. And, the league's growing at probably the rate that it should.
That's awesome. Is there any looking at the league now, do you sort of kind of hope that you were, could have played under the era? I mean, you did play in such a great era in the 90s.
No, I love the era I played in. No, everything was organic. Everything was natural. There was no hype about it. Like, it was all real. And I would never, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was a great era. And obviously you finished your career with the Bullets where it all started. What was that like, just finishing your career at the team you started with?
Well, I was very fortunate that I got to play for a very good coach in Joey Wright. He understood me as a person. I thought he managed and coached me exactly the way I needed at that time in my career. And probably would have been a good coach for me at other parts of my career as well. But I thought those final 3 seasons, I exceeded my own expectations. And, we did a good job up here in Brisbane, kind of set the platform. The year after I left, they obviously went on and had a fantastic season, one of the best seasons in NBL history. But, the 3 seasons were great here. I got to play with some really good players, and it was kind of fitting to finish it where it all began. I got to play till 39. That's exceptionally rare. Especially for a small body point guard. Like, you just don't see that often. So, and I thought, in my opinion, my game hadn't declined to the point where I look back at any games and I'm like, oh, turn that off. I think I still, from the games that I saw, I was still playing at a respectable level.
Yeah, absolutely. You were. I remember you still playing well even those years. And as I said, the NBL is upon us this weekend. It'd be amiss of me not to ask your thoughts, get some of your tips for the upcoming season, if that's okay, mate. But obviously you talked a lot about it on the basketball show last night, but obviously it's going to be a big season. New team, as you said, Tasmania, Jack Jumpers. Got some great players coming back to the league. Matthew Dellavedova's back. Drew Reith with the Illawarra Hawks. Obviously the bronze medalists, some great imports. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Jeremiah Martin goes at the New Zealand Breakers, has some NBA experience. So great players coming back, but who are you looking forward to watching from a team, but also a player point of view this year?
Well, this might sound strange, but I'm really looking forward to Bryce Cotton. I want to see, in a different system, how he handles things. I want to see what Perth really go with. Look, everybody's trying different stuff in the regular season. I want to see how Perth play offensively, because even though Trevor Gleeson was criticized for being boring and running an antiquated offense, that thing worked. And it worked really well for Bryce Cotton. He got touches when he needed. His usage rate was good. Everything just worked really well. And I'm interested to see how Scott Morrison handles that on the offensive end if they continue to work with the same efficiency. So, obviously we know what Bryce's talent is like. but I'm just keen to see him operate in a different environment. There are two guys down in Adelaide that I work with, one more so than the other, Mojave King, who I've worked with for a number of years. I'm very eager to see what Mo does this year. He already looks more mature, and he's still only 19 years old. I think he's going to have a really good year. I think CJ is the type of personality in terms of a coach that Mo can thrive under. And then, of course, I was able to spend a couple of weeks working with Kai Soto, who I rate highly.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt in my mind that Kai is going to be in the NBA probably in a couple of years. It's harder with bigs. They need to, get everything synced up with the neurons to the limbs. At 7'3", he is really nimble on his feet. He's shown glimpses in the blitz. He can step out and shoot the 3 ball. He handles it. He's a good decision maker. He can put it on the deck and go by some people. So, I think Kai and Mo are very exciting prospects, and I'm glad that they're in a space down there in Adelaide where they might be able to do some damage.
Absolutely. And you mentioned CJ, you mentioned the new coach, Scott Morrison, not the PM, but there's been a huge merry-go-round of coaches, hasn't there? Like, I've never remembered this in my time watching the game, but Chase Buford at the Kings, Scott Morrison, as I said, CJ Bruton gets a crack in Adelaide, Adam Ford's gone up to Cairns, James Duncan at Brisbane Bullets, so, and even Gorge in his second season. Like, it's incredible the coaches that are coming to the league now, but who are you looking forward to seeing, really show their credentials this year, and any of those those coaches do you think will succeed?
I'm always interested to see how the American coaches adapt to the Australian NBL when they haven't been around it a lot. So Chase Buford, for example, I'm keen to see how he does. Morrison as well. Duncan, not so much, because he spent some time here. He's kind of got a feel for how it works. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He understands the refereeing. He knows the nuances of how the game is called and just the little things that it takes time. I thought Will Weaver overall did a pretty good job, but I thought he botched the substitutions. I thought he was trying to substitute too much like an NBA season as opposed to an NBL season. But the Kings made it to a grand final that year. Okay, and then he catapulted onto the Rockets bench, so no one can really fault him. So he was probably the exception, because over the 30 plus years I've been associated with the league, there've been a lot of guys come out here from America who never really grasped the fiber of the Australian NBL and don't show the level of coaching that their talent suggested they would have, or their pedigree suggested they would have. So, I'm always keen to check it out and see how it goes. I think there's nothing wrong with an American coach, obviously, but I think he had to have been around. So I think Scott Roth down in Tasmania, I think he has an upper hand on Morrison. He has an upper hand on Buford. And, I think it's really exciting. I'm into that now, being a coach, Yeah,
of course. And just on the coaches, I mean, it may be, a storm in a teacup type thing, but I got a bit of concern about, the teams sort of trying to bring in a coach as opposed to developing Australian coaches. It doesn't seem to be that many Aussie coaches potentially coming through. I could be wrong, but do you think there's a concern there with teams sort of looking overseas to bring someone in? Again, New Zealand with Dan Shamir, I think his name is, bringing these coaches in as opposed to maybe looking to some of the Australian options as well?
I think there are ample coaches right here who have been around the league for a very long time that would do a fine job. And I agree with you. Sometimes these teams are trying to make too much of a splash and compromising perhaps a more successful season with a lesser known coach, or maybe a lesser experienced coach who's just around and ready to grind it out. And the other thing that I don't know how it works when the American coach in the off season, like, I would want my coach to be here year round. I need my coach to commit to developing players in the off season. So I'm sure that's different based on each contract, but I think that's the advantage that could be gained from having a coach who's going to be here the whole year round.
Absolutely. And just reflecting on my time, a couple more questions just on this. When I was coming through and playing, I guess I mentioned to you the West Sydney Razorbacks and being part of the development squad, you had like Gordon McLeod, Mark Watkins, Australian guys, like they're around in the off season and they're investing in the grassroots as well. Whereas some of these other guys coming in, I feel like their focus is on the NBL and that team and maybe neglecting some of the grassroots levels. So you see concerns with that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, in Brisbane, it doesn't bother me too much because then that opens up the market for my business so I can continue to attack the grassroots. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I hear you 100%. So up here, James Duncan, actually, that's something that he really likes. So he's in there grinding it out with the players, developing them. But what he does in the off season, that's the big one, these guys. The NBL guys need to be working in the off season. Everyone's doing it. Your NBA guys are getting on the floor and working with their guys in the off season, and it's not quite a done thing yet in the NBL from the players' perspective, but it needs to be done more in the years to come.
Yeah, that's good. But just finishing up with the NBL, I guess Melbourne United, they're going to be up there. Perth Wildcats, they're always there. Let's talk about Sydney Kings, but who's your tip for the title this time around? Do you think Melbourne can do it again, or do you think it'll be someone else?
This is a tough one this year. This is really, really tough.
And you got Phoenix as well. They're playing well.
I know. I'm not quite convinced with Sydney or Southeast Melbourne yet. Mm-hmm. I think there's a high ceiling and there's a low floor. Perth and Melbourne United, I just feel like they have that institutional success. And I think with Perth, it's just the culture. And with Melbourne United, I just think Vickerman understands the competition and he's going to coach that team. And so I think both of those teams are ahead of everyone else for those reasons.
Yeah.
Now you got some teams like Brisbane's loaded with guys on the perimeter. I think people are sleeping on the quality of Brisbane's perimeter. 1 through 3, they've got a lot of talent. Like I said with Sydney, if some of these guys who are kind of unknown NBL quantities raise up, it could take them up. If Xavier Cooks makes a leap to an all-star 5 type player, if he can get his numbers like to 18, 19 points a game, 10, 12 points a rebound, 10 to 12 rebounds a game to go with Martin, who we know is going to contribute, then all of a sudden, Sydney is really tough. New Zealand, I have no idea what they're going to be. I feel bad for them because I think COVID is going to just bring L's to them. I think the way they have to navigate, it's just tough. Being away from home is just hard, man. I think it just eats at you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, that's kind of how I see it. Adelaide have some pro basketball players down there. They have probably the most professional offensive player in the game in Daniel Johnson. And they're going to win their share of games at home. So this season is really exciting.
Absolutely. I love the NBL's slogan, next level. I think it's going to be next level this season and very much looking forward to it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Derek Rucker, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I loved hearing about your story, your career, and some of your insights. So thank you for joining us on the More Than a Game podcast.
Thank you, Dan. A pleasure to have. Anytime, I'm welcome to come back.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.